what I do now that I'm not teaching all the time. Because I've gone back to teaching all the time. Oh, that's exciting. I can sit on that. You're all here to learn about covering the arts in your school. And I think I have to start off by talking about why that's important. Because a whole lot, one of the things you're probably going to have to do is sell your newspaper staff on the idea that covering the orchestra or the band in your school is every bit as important and every bit as necessary as is covering the football team or the basketball team. Because frankly, it is. And frankly, in a lot of cases, it's more important. Not to slight those of you who are 6'6" and probably play basketball or high jump. But, sports plays a very important role in schools, but so do the arts. And you need to make sure that all of your arts programs get the same kind of coverage that you would give to those top-rung athletic programs in your school. Because what the kids are doing there is every bit as important, and frankly, every bit as exciting as what's going on the football field. What happens on the football field, kids practice 5 days a week, and then they go play on Saturday, and hopefully they give you Sunday off. When somebody starts to work on a drama production, they're putting in somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks of the same level of commitment that those kids on your athletics teams make every day. The difference is they only get 3 days of performance in front of everybody else. And if your drama program or your music program is any good, it should be drawing the same level of audience as your most successful sports teams. Because they've put in a huge commitment. She's telling me when she came in the door, this is production week for her school play. Got home at 11:30 last night. How many of you who are athletes get home from practice at 11:30 at night? Are there any athletes in the room? Okay. At 6'6", he doesn't play basketball. You are killing your basketball coach. You know this.
No, I'm terrible at basketball. I tried it, but...
Okay. I see. We had a guy named Mel Counts back in the day. He fouled out of every game he had. He played 7'3" tall. He played for the LA Lakers. You can look it up. And when I was in high school, we had a guy, Bert Schoenberg, who was 6'11" tall. He showed up at the beginning of our sophomore year. We thought we were going to win every state title the rest of the year, and then we found out he had 4 feet, none of which worked in concert with each other. He played the first 4 minutes of every game, and he played the first 4 minutes of the second half of every game. And then he was on the bench for the rest of the game because he fouled out. Poor Rick. And yet he was. People went looking. People from Georgia Tech and Georgia State came up to look at him, and eventually offered him a 4-year scholarship to go play basketball and foul out of their games. That was the end of Rick. His best friend was all of about 5 feet 2 inches tall, and was a point guard. In any event, so much for sports. The trick that I'm trying to get you all to understand is what goes on in your arts programs is every bit as important as what goes on with those. The thing that everybody sees immediately are the drama club productions and the band concerts. And those deserve a great deal of coverage, in part because they require a great deal of effort to do. And when you're doing those, when you're doing it, it's things that are basically event-oriented. You need to think about them in terms of two different levels of coverage. The first is pre-writing. Just like you would pre-write a basketball game or a baseball game or a football game, where you're talking about who the opponent is and what's going to happen this weekend and what the team's plan is for that game. The pre-write for a theater piece is pretty much the same thing. One of the questions that you want to ask is, why this play in this place at this time? There is a political content to every single piece of theater that's out there. We had a real problem going on in our town in terms of class issues at one point. And the upper class kids were taking advantage of the lower class kids. So we did the crucible, and we aimed it directly at that problem. You see what I'm talking about? Nothing happens in a vacuum. There were other times when the only reason we did a play was we looked at it and said, we've always wanted to do this play, and for the first time, we have a cast that's capable of pulling that off. When I was teaching in New Hampshire, our drama director decided looked at the kids she had coming back and that were available the next year and said, my God, I've always wanted to do Midsummer Night's Dream, and I've got the perfect cast for it. And sometimes that's how the decision gets made about what the play is that kids are going to do. We had a girl who played on our basketball team who was 6 feet tall and was a very good actress. And she was a perfect Helena, who has to be tall, to go with Hermia, who has this wonderful line, how tall are you, you painted maypole? So are you so tall that I cannot climb up and scratch your eyes out? And it was a great comic scene as a result. That meant, however, we had to have people that were the right size to be the guys on the other half of it. So you see how that works? Those are the kinds of questions that you want to ask when you're talking about theater. You want to go talk to the people who, and you do this as a series of stories. You start with, they're casting for this thing, and then you go talk to the director. And then a couple weeks later, you go talk to the people who got the leads, and to some of the people who got the minor parts. Because they usually are the people who 2-3 years from now are going to be your headliners. And you talk to them about the role that they're playing and their reaction to getting the part and all those kinds of things. And as you get closer to the production, you talk about the sets and the costumes. So you talk to the set designer and the lighting person. How are you lighting this? Because one of your jobs in terms of reporting on the arts is to educate your audience about the arts. You've always got to be.
Favorite class for me.
Is that why you put me upstairs last year? You like this
I like
one?
this. Anyway, hi.
Hello. Helen's the director of the whole program. Where was I? You do the same thing with music, with band concerts, with jazz concerts, or whatever concerts are being put on. Again, those happen a couple times a year, but the amount of rehearsal time that goes into them gives you plenty of time to lead into that, so you can educate people about music. Now, and I use the theater thing because theater is a thing that I am much more familiar with than I am with music. But again, why are we doing this particular piece of music in this orchestra concert? Sometimes it has to do with the talent of the group that you have. Sometimes it has to do with, again, politically what's going on in the environment. Sometimes it has to do with, I just happen to like this piece of music. But you never know what you're going to get for a response. One year, our music director decided he was going to do, again, this was in New Hampshire, he wanted to do Handel's Messiah at Christmas time. That's a huge undertaking. You got to have voices coming out your nostrils to pull it off. I've seen it done professionally. It's an amazing piece of work. So we had lots to talk about in terms of why was he doing this? And his reasoning was very simple. One, it's Christmas time, and by the way, Handel's Messiah anywhere other than, you all know it, the Alleluia chorus, right? And most of you have this blank stare. Alleluia, Alleluia. You know it now? Okay, it's everywhere. You know, you had to have great voices to do this, and one of the things that we talked about was, for the first time in his career, he had those great voices, but it was also, in the rest of the world, it's an Easter thing. You don't see it at Christmas time, you don't hear it at Christmas time, it's done at Easter in England and in Europe. Here it's done at Christmas. Don't ask me why, I don't understand, but that's the way we are. But he had the opportunity, he had voices to pull it off, and he was teaching in a very Christian kind of community that he thought, you know, we can sell a lot of tickets to this. We can make a substantial amount of money for the music program, and we can buy a whole lot of new stuff with it. He sold it out so badly that we had to move the performance from the auditorium, which seated 1,000, to our gym, which thank God had decent acoustics, where he could seat 1,800. And he filled the place. This was in a community, folks, that only had 8,000 winter residents. And we filled a 50, and we could have sold more tickets. It was amazing. But our newspaper also backed his play on that, because we made sure that we were covering this all the time. The other piece of it that gets ignored, and most of what you have in front of you, everybody knows to do those two pieces. You know, you do the theater thing, you do the thing, the musical thing. We ignore art. We ignore individual performance folks. And what I've given you is not the best stuff ever written. And it's not really even a representative sample of the kinds of things we were covering when I was teaching. What I tried to do in the stuff that I gave you was give you the different stuff, for the most part, that people don't think of when they're covering the arts. Every year, the Boston Globe runs this big statewide competition for art. It's called the Gold Key Awards. We had a kid win one once. Her artistic talent was amazing. We had a local gallery that did a show for high school students. And our kids every year got entered in that. And we did pretty well. Especially considering how much money we didn't spend on the arts as a school system. There's a responsibility to cover those kinds of things that happen. If your high school sports team won a state championship, where would you put that?
Front page.
It would be front page news. Exactly. Well, if you have somebody who's named to the All-State Drama Festival, where should that be? If your school wins the Drama Festival,
Yeah, front page, but normally.
it should be on the front page. That stuff gets buried. When somebody makes district chorus or somebody makes the state chorus, where does that belong? Does it even get covered in most high school newspapers? And the truth is, it doesn't. There are kids who go out who know in high school music is going to be my career. And sometimes you can hear it in their voices when they get up and sing. Sometimes you know that you have a kid who is going to be a theater all-star, somebody who you're going to see on film somewhere someday. And it happens. Doesn't happen all the time, but it happens. You want to encourage those dreams the same way that your sports people get their dreams covered. Yeah, we had 3 kids at Westport right at the end of my career sign letters of intent. We had 2 guys who were drafted by the Boston, one by the Boston Red Sox and one by the Florida Marlins when they were good. One of them actually got to have a cup of coffee in the major leagues. Played for the Brewers for 2 years. Played for the Marlins for 6 weeks the year that they won the World Championship back in the 90s. The other kid made it to AAA 3 times, and they messed with his pitching delivery so badly that, he was going nowhere by the time, and he just finally got tired of it and took the police exam, and he's now a police officer. But we covered their dreams all the way through high school because scouts were showing up for Alan from the day he arrived in the 9th grade. He already had a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. We covered his dream all the way through high school. But equally, we had a kid who signed a recording contract right out of high school, took a year off after she graduated from high school before she went to college, and went on the road with 2 other girls, and were the opening act for Maroon 5 for a while. She came back home, she's still singing professionally. We covered her dream all the way through high school. There's a group called Another Option. We covered their dream all the way through high school. They finally broke up in 2010, but not until they had done a couple of tours in the United States, toured Europe. You've never heard of them. They were a group that did all the right things, but let me tell you, the music business is not pretty. It's not an easy place to break into. It's like trying to be a professional athlete. If you're going to make it, you have to work really hard and get some breaks along the way. I have some friends that are actors at Trinity Rep who are my age at this point. I met them back 30 years ago now. They're very good actors. One of them is as good as Dustin Hoffman and makes Tom Cruise look like an inept incompetent, which, by the way, he is. Despite the fact that girls still just sigh all the time, just on the basis of his, he's only about 5 feet 4 inches tall. When he was working with, what's her name, the Australian woman? Nicole Kidman. He had to stand on a box in order to get up to her height. The scenes where he's looking lovingly into her eyes, he's either in lifts or standing on a box. Any of these guys are better actors than he is. And yet, they've never gotten any further than Providence. You got to be in the right place at the right time. Dustin Hoffman happened to be in the right place at the right time. Accomplishing anything in the arts is a crapshoot, frankly. But you cover it anyway. Just like you get, listen, none of the athletes in your school, over the course of my entire life, I taught for 33 years, 2 guys ever made it to a professional sport. 2. One of them actually got to play at the major league level as a 5th starter on a team that wasn't going anywhere. That didn't mean that we didn't cover sports. None of the kids you know, in all probability, are going to be the big hit. But you don't never know. You never know. And you need to encourage those dreams. Because those folks need all the encouragement they can get. Because in high school, if you're a guy and you write poetry, all the guys think you're nuts. Gentlemen, learn to write poetry. Girls love it. You write a girl a real poem, write her a sonnet, even if it's not tremendously good, she will worship the ground you walk on. Am I lying to you? Ladies, am I lying? You know, and yet we have this whole image of only girls write poetry, which I never have understood. But then I was one of those guys in high school who was writing poetry. We don't think about writers as being artists when we're talking about high school kids. And yet they are. I've known over the course of my life 4 different kids who have had novels finished by the time they were done with their senior year in high school. I've known 2 kids who wrote nonfiction stuff. Wrote a book of really good nonfiction essays. You really have to dig to find those people sometimes. But go look for them. They have wonderful stories to tell. So do the artists, so do the people that, you know, there are sculptors and painters and photographers. They do amazing things. In one of the handouts, there's a photograph taken by this girl who's Montoya, and it didn't reproduce very well here because I printed these out on my laser printer last night. She's got a picture that's a triple exposure where she's wanted to show all 3 sides of her personality. And it's a self-portrait. It's on the 2nd page of the thing. It's on 2 pages. Gold Key. Montoya wins Gold Key as a story. And it's an amazing piece of photography, but it's even more an original idea for how to do that particular thing. And the Globe liked it enough that they gave it a Gold Key. No, it's one of the ones that's stapled together. It's a 2-page thing. And you may not have it because you didn't sit up here at the front. That'll teach you. Anyway, what else is on there? Let's talk a little bit about reviewing. About writing for the arts. First thing I'm going to tell you is don't write about music if you don't know anything about music. If you are not comfortable with the jargon that goes with being into music, don't try and write about it. If you don't know the difference between chords and picking, you don't have any business trying to write about a guitarist. If you don't know what a riff is, you've no business writing about rock and roll music. You need to know the terminology, and you need to be so comfortable with it that it's second nature. Of course, in high school, this makes life very difficult, because guess what? The people who really understand music are the people that you're probably writing about. But you owe it to them and you owe it to yourself to go make sure that you understand enough about the fundamentals of what it is they're trying to do. Same thing is true in theater. Anybody can go to a play and say, oh, that was good. Well, why was it good? Well, I liked it. Yeah, well, why did you like it? Because I liked it. You want to try and write a review based on that? You need to be able to talk about acting. You need to know what projection is. You need to know what enunciation is. You need to know what blocking is. You need to have a rudimentary understanding of lighting. I blew one of my professors' minds when I was in college. I was writing theater reviews, and I went to this musical to write a review on it. And I was reviewing, we were coming out on Friday morning, so I was there for a Wednesday night dress rehearsal. And it was the most miserable 3 hours of my life. His singers couldn't hit the right notes. The special effects were really awful. I'd seen better work done by high school students, frankly. And to make matters worse, the lights weren't even focused right. He had a spotlight that was focused. This was supposed to be focused on the apron of the stage that was actually focused 4 feet too low, so it was striking the front of the stage where the orchestra would sit, except it was too far left to be focused on the orchestra. And I walked up to him and said afterwards, we're not going to review this tonight. I'll do a pre-write. We've already got the pre-write in the bag, but this thing is awful. You haven't even got the lights focused right. And he looked at me and he said, you saw that? And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, you should be writing reviews, really, because you see the things that you're supposed to see, that you need to be able to see in order to be a good reviewer. He also wanted me to come take a directing course, but I transferred out of Northeastern before I could do it. And the reason for that was simple. I just didn't like what Northeastern was doing. You should never be an English major at Northeastern. It's a really good engineering school. They have a great criminal justice program. And maybe their English program has gotten better in the last 40-odd years. But let me tell you, it was awful when I was there. Can I tell you? But the trick with all of this stuff is you've got to know what it is you're looking at and how to look at it. You need, when you go to a concert, just the fact that people are jumping up and down and screaming at the top of their lungs doesn't mean they're a good punk act. I love rap, but 99% of it is absolute dreck. There's good. There's some really good rap. But most of it that finds its way into people's hands is awful. You know, I took dance courses when I was in high school. I had the need to prove it. So I can write about dance because I know about it. Enough to be dangerous. okay? And that's the real trick. You need to have knowledge of what it is you're writing about. Sometimes that means going and taking a course. Sometimes it means sitting down and reading a good book on the subject. But it's all, it's all got to come out of a knowledge base. It's not enough to just sit and listen to a piece of music. You've got to know what it is you're looking at. When somebody said to me, we need you to be able to write about art, the first thing I did was I went and I got myself a good book on sculpture and a good book on painting and a good book on photography. I don't remember the names of the other two, but I can tell you, the first book I turned to learn about photography was written by Ansel Adams. You all know Ansel Adams?
Name rings a bell.
Name rings a bell? Probably the greatest American landscape photographer in our history. He invented something called the four-tone system, which anybody who's a good photographer should know about. I can look at a photograph and tell you whether it's any good or not, and I can tell you why. But I sat down and spent hours and hours learning how to look at photography. Then I sat down and talked with some really good photographers about, okay, tell me about this, tell me about that. Tell me about quality of light. Because I kept reading these words, quality of light. The hell's quality of light mean? And here's the trick in photography. When you look at a photograph, what you're seeing is reflected light and absorbed light. And when you look at a photograph and you don't look at it as a picture, but you look at it as light and the absence of light, suddenly photography is a very different world. It's a very different way of looking at a photograph. But it's the way every good photographer I've ever met looks at photography. They don't look at it as a picture. They look at it as what is the light doing to the object and how do I record that? And then, of course, unfortunately, you guys are Photoshop generation. You never worked with film. It's amazing what you can do with a piece of film. I have a photograph that I took that I played with so that I would understand light and what somebody does with a negative. And I get 8 different versions of the same photograph. And every one of them is significantly different because of how long it was exposed, how long the negative was exposed over the photo paper. And it gives me a different perspective on photography having done that, because I know what you can do in the darkroom. I know what you can do in Photoshop, but it's not the same. It's a different way of looking at it. And when people started using Photoshop, what did I have to do? I had to go learn Photoshop so I could understand what it was they were doing with the photographs that they had. You are not, but I need to underline one other thing. You are high school students. Just as the actors on the stage are high school students. When you're writing a review, the thing that needs to be uppermost in your mind is not to compare the performance of your high school orchestra to the Boston Symphony. Those guys have all been to Juilliard. They rehearse 8 to 10 hours a day on their own. And then they come together and rehearse together for 2 or 3 hours every day. No high school kid has time to do that. Very few high school kids are ever going to be able to do that. When you look at a kid on stage, you have to keep in mind, they haven't had 4 years of training as a musician, as a singer, as an actor, as an artist. What you need to do is look at it and say, how are they doing for the level that they're at? I have seen some amazing high school productions on stage. I have seen amazing high school orchestras and choruses and bands. They do amazing things. But the moment I sit down and listen to them as an example of, the moment I try and compare them to the BSO, to a Broadway show, to an Oscar-winning film, they fail. And they fail miserably. Because they're high school kids. And when you're writing a review, if the play is no good, it's not the kid's fault. It's the director's fault for picking that play and not having the talent available to do it. If the lighting's no good, it's not because the kid didn't know how to focus the thing, it's because whoever was in charge of the lighting didn't know what they were doing. And if it's a kid, I'm not going to blame a kid for misfocusing a light. At Northeastern, you bloody well know that I could blame the lighting director because he should, they've been working on this play for 8 weeks. That light bloody well should have been focused where it was supposed to be focused. And it wasn't. And it wasn't the kid's fault that was the case. That was the lighting director because he didn't see it. And the lighting director was a professor at Northeastern who should have known better. The director should have known better than to put that play up there if he didn't have the voices to carry it off. I couldn't blame the kids for what happened there. Any more than you can blame a kid who doesn't project well on stage. Don't blame them. Blame the person that put them there. You don't blame anybody. And again, you have to keep in mind too, the person who's the theater director in your school, is that their full-time job to direct high school plays? No, they're teaching 4 other classes at a minimum every day, probably 5, maybe 6. They're being paid maybe $2,500 to do this show, which by the time you're done with the number of hours of rehearsal and planning and designing, et cetera, probably works out to about a penny an hour. You know, you're not dealing with professionals or people that are at the top of their craft. So when you're writing a review, be gentle. And if there's nothing good about the play, don't review it. Do a post-write instead, in which people talk about, you know, the actors talk about what they learned from doing the play. The director talks about whether they made money or not, what they learned from doing the play, those kinds of things. Because those things matter every bit as much, in a lot of respects, as the play itself and the performance itself. You know, we had to shut our theater program down at one point in Westport because we didn't have the money to run it anymore. They could not, they were sick. Have you ever seen a terrible little piece of theater called It's Just a High School Play? The royalties are $100 a night. If you fill a 5,000 seat auditorium, it's awful. It is one of the worst pieces of drama I have ever seen. That was what they were reduced to performing, was those kinds of plays. And they were gassed, and you know, the play itself, good God, Dustin Hoffman couldn't have saved it. Meryl Streep couldn't have saved it. Harrison Ford couldn't have saved it, and he lives in our neighborhood in the summertime. Nobody would have saved it. So they had an audience of 10 people a night. It was gas fund. And they folded, the program had to fold for 2 years while they tried to figure out a way to raise some money so that they could put up, so it didn't even cost them another play. And then they did work. Which is a musical based on Studs Terkel's book, Working. And it's an amazing piece of theater. And the girl who sang the lead, last week got news that she is going to be singing opera in the city of New York 2 years after she finished her college degree. She doesn't have the lead, but she's singing at the Met. And that, my friends, is a dream come true that every aspiring artist wants. Questions? Let's see what time it is. No questions? I was that good or that bad? I bored you all to death? Yeah, we got about 5 minutes for questions, yeah.
When it comes to leads for arts and entertainment, would you want more of an AP style lead or more creative one where you kind of want to?
Depends on the story.
Okay.
You know, it's like when people ask me, how long should a story be? A story should be as long as it takes. And the lead that you use really depends on what you have to work with. Sometimes a straight AP kind of news lead is the right way to go, and sometimes something more creative is the way to go. It's really a judgment call, a lot of the time. But if it's more of a news item, then you go AP. If it's more of a featurey, fun kind of thing, then you go the other way. Other questions? Oh, come on, folks. Was I that bad? I mean, nobody's got any questions. I covered the art, how to cover school arts that well. I doubt it.
So for a newspaper like LHS's, which is only like printed every month, what would you like? I don't know, because like rehearsals start in like 1 month and the next the play's actually on, so there's no real space for a story, like a lead up of stories. So what would you like recommend in that kind of case?
How would you cover your football team?
I actually have no idea how we cover a football team.
How would you cover a basketball team? Of course, I'm asking you to say, look, I would do it this way. One, the drama director knows well in advance what play they're going to be doing. They don't just come in one day and say, oh, I think we'll have a casting call for this play today. So you need to contact them early. And the first month, you do you do a pre-write. And you hope that they schedule the play fairly close to when you're coming out. And then the second month, and again, it depends on where the date of the thing falls. Exactly what you do. If the play's going to happen the day you come out, then it should be on page 1 and it should be the lead, unless somebody blew the school up. Or something else really, truly major happened that would push it off of page 1. But it's the biggest event going on in your school that month. If it's 2 weeks away, I'd still tend to go in that direction, but it might fall onto page 3 depending on what's coming out that day, what's going on the day you come out. And certainly you owe them some kind of a post-write, whether it's a review or it's
like a retrospective or something?
yeah, a retrospective kind of piece. And again, that depends on how far back it is. The closer it is, the more I would say do a review. The further out it is, a more retrospective piece about, what did you learn from this?
All right.
And try and find a way to come out more often than monthly. Are you guys online?
We had something going with that, a couple of years ago. I'm part of the broadcast thing now, so I
Okay.
don't really deal so much within the print.
Yeah.
But I think,
Well, if you're doing broadcast, then again, you should be doing exactly what I said earlier. If you're doing a broadcast, how often are you doing your broadcast?
oh, actually, that's right, we can have like videos on every week, so I guess that would be right.
Yeah, I would look at the broadcast situation where I would look at it as a weekly newspaper, almost. In terms of what some of my content would be. And I would insist on covering the arts the same way we covered everything else. In fact, I'd probably be pushing for an arts editor. As one of the news directing kinds of positions. I'm sure you got a guy or a girl that does sports on your broadcast, yes?
Yeah.
And you should have somebody whose primary responsibility is to dig out those art stories. Because I think that that's a really big potential driver of audience. Because, kids are much more interested in events and the arts than they are, a lot of them, in sports at this point. And with what's going on in professional sports right now, I think we're 15 to 20 years away from professional sports, everybody looking at professional sports the way most of us look at professional wrestling. The fix is in. Anybody else? Thanks for listening to me maunder on. Have a good rest of your day. And please, if you didn't get everything, take one of these piles that's here. I don't want to take them home with me.
Have a good day.
You too.